Right now, someone just like you opened this video because they're tired of scrolling Instagram until 1 a.m., telling themselves tomorrow will be different. Maybe it's after a long day of classes, or after work when you promised yourself you'd finally tackle that project. It's not that you aren't capable, it's that your current self has been hijacked by distractions, while your potential self waits, frustrated, on the sidelines. Many people lose hours each day to attention-stealing apps, and you already know which ones pull you in. By the end of this video, you'll understand why procrastination happens and the single first move to break free. But before we talk solutions, you need to see what procrastination actually is and what it is. The real enemy isn't laziness. Most people assume procrastination is just laziness. That's the label slapped on the kid who misses homework, the employee who struggles with deadlines, or the creator who never hits publish. But here's the key truth: it's not laziness at all. Procrastination is better understood as conflict. It's the clash between two versions of you. The right now self wants comfort, the scroll, the snack, the nap, the easy hit of dopamine. The future self wants the reward that only shows up later. The degree finished, the project launched, the skill sharpened. Those two selves spend the entire day pulling you in opposite directions. When you stall, it isn't about weakness or apathy. It's about being locked in that tug-of-war between comfort today and growth tomorrow. Think about the last time you sat down to quickly check your phone when you meant to start something important. That wasn't a lazy choice. It was your brain protecting you from discomfort. Writing an essay, pitching a client, or opening that messy spreadsheet doesn't deliver the same chemical rush as a funny clip in your feed. Your brain keeps score of which path feels safer. It knows where stress melts and where it spikes. So of course your body gravitates toward the option that removes tension fastest. That's why blaming yourself for laziness doesn't hold up. You're wired to seek relief before reward. Psychologists have long shown how decision fatigue feeds this cycle. Every small choice, open an email, reply to a notification, or start that overdue task, uses up mental energy. As the day wears on, the uphill climb toward difficult work feels heavier. Combine that with what research calls analysis paralysis and perfectionism, and it's no surprise avoidance grows. When you overthink every step or fear doing something wrong, hesitation multiplies. Modern life adds dozens of decisions, pings, and inputs on top of this, until procrastination feels less like a personal flaw and more like an almost automatic outcome of the environment we're in. Our evolved wiring leans toward immediate rewards, and information overload makes that tendency stronger unless we put intentional breaks in the cycle. And if you don't understand this, you end up chasing the wrong solution. You grab self-help mantras about hustle, you shame yourself for not caring enough, you force routines that never stick. But none of that works if the battle itself is misdiagnosed. Imagine thinking you're fighting laziness, when really it's two versions of you wrestling for control of the same steering wheel. You can't strategize properly when you don't recognize who or what you're really up against. Take James, for example. For years, he swore he was just lazy. Assignments turned in late, study sessions dissolving into shows, half-finished projects piling up on the side. The word lazy became his identity. The turning point happened when he read that procrastination can act like a protective reflex, not a lack of motivation. Suddenly, everything shifted. He realized it wasn't that he didn't care. His brain was flagging tasks as threats to be avoided. What he thought was a fixed trait was actually the constant battle between short-term relief and long-term potential. That new perspective changed everything. Once he stopped labeling himself as broken, he started making decisions that helped his future self win more often. This adjustment carries a strange kind of freedom. When you frame procrastination as a clash of selves instead of a character flaw, you stop dragging around shame like heavy baggage. You no longer compare yourself to some imagined breed of superhuman who pushes through without hesitation. You see that everyone fights the same battle, only some people recognize the real mechanics while others keep mislabeling it. Recognizing it doesn't excuse you to sit still, but it explains why telling yourself, "I just have no discipline," never worked. The power of this realization is simple: clarity. You're not fundamentally flawed. You're not condemned to stall forever. You're just human. And once you see procrastination as a pattern governed by rules rather than by your worth, you can actually work with it. Strategies make sense again because you're applying them to the real challenge, not chasing shadows. Miss this shift, though, and you'll waste years fighting the wrong opponent. You'll cut social media but still stall on what matters. You'll think failure equals personal weakness when really it was discomfort avoidance. You'll keep yourself in an invisible cage, blaming yourself for problems rooted in basic wiring, while the actual causes remain out of sight. That's the cruel trick of procrastination, convincing you the problem is laziness, so you never uncover the roots of hesitation. That's why reframing matters so much. You begin to interpret procrastination not as proof of weakness, but as a signal telling you your present self is overpowering your future self. You notice how the system around you, constant notifications, endless streaming, task lists that never end, feeds your desire for small relief while starving long-term rewards. Once you see this clearly, the problem stops being "I'm lazy" and starts being "my brain is chasing what feels easier right now." And that's a problem you can prepare to solve. Look at your own patterns through that lens. Pay attention when you hesitate, not because the task is impossible, but because the feelings tied to it are uncomfortable. Notice how "I'll be more focused tomorrow" or "I just need to get organized first" are really just present self negotiations, buying more comfort, and pushing your potential self further into the background. Recognizing those voices for what they are strips away their power. So the point isn't to crush laziness, it's to mediate between competing selves. Once you learn to manage that negotiation, procrastination doesn't feel like a moral failure anymore. It transforms into a tactical problem, and a tactical problem can be worked on. You can experiment, fail, adjust, and improve. Because although you can't control every instinct, you can design ways to tip the balance in your future self's favor. Here's the thing, understanding the real enemy doesn't mean the struggle disappears. It just means you stop swinging blindfolded. You know what's pulling at you, and you can begin setting conditions that give the right self more leverage. That's the shift that separates people stuck in cycles of shame from people who slowly gain traction. You aren't broken, you're navigating a conflict wired into all of us. But knowing that truth isn't enough. Because once you recognize procrastination as this conflict, a new problem sneaks in, one that feels productive but secretly keeps you stuck. It's the habit of preparing, planning, and organizing endlessly without ever actually stepping into the work itself. And that trap is just as sneaky as the distractions we've been talking about. The trap of preparing without doing. You know that moment when you feel like you've worked all afternoon, but really all you did was reorganize your Notion folders or fiddle with the layout of your calendar? That's the trap of preparing without doing. It's slippery because it feels like progress. You've been busy, you've been moving things around, but nothing has actually inched forward. Preparation delivers the same false satisfaction as achievement without requiring the discomfort of starting, and your brain is eager to take that trade. The setup rituals are endless. You sit with the best intentions to write, but before a word lands on the page, you're selecting fonts, adjusting templates, or browsing for the perfect writing app. Students swear they're studying, but somehow spend an hour choosing playlists before opening their notes. Workers say they're focused, yet lose entire mornings color coding boards and syncing productivity tools. What ties these examples together is the illusion. You can leave the day exhausted from effort, with little real progress to show. Technology makes this cycle worse. Every year brings new apps for planning, managing, scheduling, measuring. Each tool promises clarity, but each also gives you a new way to stay busy without advancing the real work. Hybrid and remote setups intensify the dynamic because people bounce between chats, calendars, video calls, and endless dashboards. Research shows that this constant tool hopping and meeting churn drains huge portions of the workday. Instead of long sessions of focused output, the day splinters into fragments of shallow preparation. The result? Hours disappear into what feels like productivity theater, while the core project remains untouched. Why is this so appealing? Because it feels safer. When you polish a system or design the perfect note structure, you feel in control. Facing what matters, writing an opening paragraph, recording a first video draft, sketching an idea that may flop, feels uncertain and uncomfortable. Preparation sidesteps that unease. It provides a momentary sense of certainty, which psychology research shows the brain craves when tasks feel ambiguous or high stakes. That pursuit of cognitive comfort explains why the preparation trap is so sticky. It lets you appear diligent without exposing yourself to the discomfort of real action. Consider Sarah, a college senior with a deadline looming. She planned to finish half her paper on Saturday. By midnight, she hadn't typed a single paragraph. What she had finished was 3 new playlists for concentration, a reorganized bookshelf, and countless tweaks to her note-taking app. To her, the day had been full of effort. In reality, all she had done was circle the moment she feared, writing that first clumsy sentence. Preparation gave her the comfort of feeling ready, but readiness never arrived. That's the cruel part. There's always one more playlist to build, one more workspace to tidy, one more method to fine-tune. Yet none of those things deliver a finished paper. This is why it's so important to separate real output from the rituals around output. Drafts written, code shipped, presentations rehearsed, those are evidence of work done. The rest is often camouflage. The truth is, most actual progress feels awkward in the moment. Opening a blank document means battling clunky first sentences. Recording the first attempt at a video often means stiff delivery and awkward pauses. Going to the gym means pushing through discomfort. None of it looks aesthetic or polished. That's exactly why the brain steers toward playlists, folders, templates, and tidy dashboards. Those look clean, immediate, and controllable, while the real task looks messy. Once you recognize that pattern, spotting it in your daily habits becomes easier. Pause when you catch yourself organizing workspaces instead of starting the work itself. Notice when planning to-do lists quietly takes the place of actually tackling an item on them. The recognition alone strips much of the trap's power. Because when you see preparation for what it is, avoidance dressed as progress, you can choose differently. Sometimes it's as simple as asking, what's the smallest step I could take right now? And then taking it before your brain drags you back into rituals of setup. This doesn't mean preparation has no value. Tools can support you, but only when used in service of actual execution. A neat Trello board is worthless if its tasks don't move. A calendar means nothing if deadlines still slide. A playlist doesn't matter if the exam remains unstudied. The distinction that counts is between organizing for clarity and organizing as a stall. The first clears the path for action, the second becomes the path itself, and only one delivers results. It can feel harsh to admit, but the only way to escape this cycle is to embrace the discomfort of beginning. Not someday, not when things are perfectly arranged, but now, with whatever messy first step you can take. That's when momentum builds, because done work, no matter how rough, creates energy for the next step. Preparation, in contrast, gives zero compounding effect. You can prepare endlessly, but find yourself trapped in the same place year after year. The gap between potential and reality remains wide, fenced in by rituals that look like focus at the moment. The preparation trap also explains why so many long workdays still feel empty. Without clear checkpoints of finished tasks, the day collapses into a haze of setting up without following through. Hybrid workers know this feeling well. Meetings stacked in the name of coordination, tools updated in the name of organization, but little that represents real output completed. The exhaustion is real, but so is the lack of results. Understanding that difference changes how you end a day. Instead of asking, "Was I busy?" the sharper question becomes, "What's finished that didn't exist this morning?" That's the only measure your future self will care about. Avoiding this pitfall takes vigilance. It requires catching yourself in the small moments when comfort wins over progress. Every time you slip into maintenance mode, reorganizing files, tweaking formats, changing profile bios instead of writing a page, you have to pull back. Label it for what it is. Decide if it actually clears the path forward or if it only delays you. That simple pause can reroute a lost afternoon into a finished chapter, a draft email sent, or a first step taken. This shift isn't about eliminating all preparation. Some structure is necessary. It's about stripping out the excess and refusing to mistake it for real work. Otherwise, you spend half your life perfecting wrappers around the task instead of facing the task. Recognizing that boundary between work that produces results and rituals that only feel like work is the core skill that frees you from this cycle. And here's where the stakes rise, because the preparation trap isn't the only illusion at play. Even if you sidestep it, the culture around productivity is full of widely accepted practices that quietly slow you down. Routines, habits, and beliefs we're taught to admire can turn into invisible anchors. We call them productivity hacks, when in truth they're myths that keep you stuck. What if the very systems you've been relying on to get ahead are the same ones holding you back? Think about that for a moment. The myths that keep you stuck. There are certain ideas about productivity that sound useful on the surface, but quietly drain your energy every day. These aren't small habits, they're myths, repeated so often that they feel like common sense. Multitasking, rigid rituals, overloaded calendars, and equating busyness with progress are some of the most popular. They look impressive, they feel legitimate, but they quietly prevent you from moving forward in ways that count. To untangle procrastination, you first need to spot and discard these myths for what they are. Take multitasking first. It's treated as a badge of honor, the skill you put on resumes or boast about when someone asks how you manage to keep up. But when you try splitting attention, answering emails while sitting in a meeting, listening to a podcast while writing a report, you don't double your results. You dilute them. Research into task switching shows substantial losses in speed and accuracy. Some studies describe declines in the tens of % range. What feels like efficiency is really your brain burning cycles on the constant switch. The cost is invisible in the moment, but obvious in the long run. Fragmented focus, more mistakes, and work that simply takes longer than it should. The reality is that doing one task with complete attention often outperforms juggling 3 with half your focus. The replacement is deceptively simple: single tasking. Choose a block of time, protect it, do one thing until it's finished or hits a natural breakpoint. That kind of depth works with your wiring instead of tearing it apart. Now look at the myth of the flawless morning ritual. Somewhere along the line, productivity advice equated waking at exactly 5 a.m., journaling, meditating, stretching, and drinking specialized powders with unlocking success. Routines can help, yes, but rigidity often backfires. If one element of the ritual fails, hitting snooze, skipping the journaling, you judge the day as wasted before it even begins. What was supposed to be a support system quietly becomes another form of procrastination. More energy goes into preserving the image of an idealized morning than into work itself. The truth is, it's not those exact steps that create success, but whether your morning opens space for clarity and action. A flexible framework works better than strict choreography. If a routine helps, keep it. If it turns into another hoop to jump through, strip it away. The replacement here is flexibility, a structure that supports you without collapsing when reality interrupts. Calendars provide another illusion. You can spend an afternoon shifting boxes, color-coding categories, syncing reminders across devices until the screen looks tidy. It feels like control. But the first unexpected call or urgent request often throws the whole plan into disarray. By midweek, the polished schedule unravels, yet the tweaking continues. The deeper problem is confusing the appearance of organization with actual progress. A neat grid means nothing if it doesn't generate finished work. What helps is not an intricate system to manage life minute by minute, but a simple setup that fits your rhythm, something you'll actually use when plans change. Think of it as scaffolding, not sculpture. The replacement is clarity over complexity. Maintain a system just simple enough to guide action, not so elaborate that it becomes its own full-time project. Perhaps the most persistent myth is that being busy equals being productive. Long hours, back-to-back meetings, endless email chains, these activities generate a visible kind of importance. But busyness measures motion, not progress. You can sit through 10 calls, chase 100 messages, and end the day with nothing substantial completed. This trap is especially sticky in workplaces that reward visibility over results. The exhaustion feels legitimate, but the outcomes prove otherwise. One example, a manager I worked with once realized her full week of nonstop meetings left her with 0 actual deliverables. The meetings had value only in appearance, not in contribution. Recognizing this gap changed everything for her. She began measuring days not by hours filled, but by priorities finished. The replacement strategy is simple: quality over quantity. A shorter, quieter day stacked with tangible progress far outpaces a longer one full of scattered activity. Another widespread belief is that motivation has to come first. People wait for the spark, the perfect moment to feel ready, energized, or inspired. But that spark rarely arrives when you need it. Waiting for it is like waiting for perfect weather. You can end up staring at the sky indefinitely. Evidence suggests the opposite. Action generates motivation, not the other way around. Once you start, even in an uninspired state, momentum builds and motivation follows. The current self prefers waiting because postponement feels safer than risking clumsy beginnings. But progress hides in those first messy steps that trigger energy to accumulate. The replacement here is clear. Start before you feel ready, and let motion fuel your drive. Together, these myths share one thing: they reward appearances. Multitasking shows off your ability to juggle. Elaborate routines make mornings look purposeful. Calendar tweaking creates the illusion of command. Busyness earns approval from managers and peers. Waiting for motivation spares you from uncomfortable starts. In each case, your present self gets its hit of reassurance. But your future self, the one depending on results, receives little. The myths survive because they look reasonable. Who wouldn't want to handle multiple tasks, organize their days, make the most of mornings, or stay busy? Yet beneath the surface, these behaviors protect you more from discomfort than from failure. They emphasize feeling good in the present, not succeeding in the long run. Spotting these myths isn't about dismissing structure or self-management altogether. It's about stripping away what's performative so you keep what's actually useful. Deep, single-focused work outperforms scatter. Flexible routines support without suffocating. Simple systems keep you on track more reliably than complicated ones. A small number of completed priorities achieves more than a long list of activities that go nowhere. And starting even when uninspired beats waiting endlessly for motivation to arrive. These are not glamorous replacements, but they work. They shift your energy from defending appearances into creating outcomes. Yet something deeper fuels why people cling to myths even when they know better. Multitasking, rigid rituals, overstuffed schedules, and the hunt for motivation all numb a more difficult truth: that sitting down to real work often threatens your sense of self. Facing the task directly stirs discomfort that myths help cover. The false productivity keeps you comfortable because it hides something more sensitive just beneath the surface. And that unseen driver explains why procrastination resists simple fixes. It isn't laziness, and it isn't just a matter of tweaking routines. Because the real reason people delay is that the tasks are boring or inconvenient. The avoidance often runs deeper. Some work feels uncomfortable precisely because it challenges the story you hold about yourself. And when identity feels threatened, procrastination disguises itself in clever forms to keep you safe. That hidden force is what we have to turn to next. Why fear disguises itself as procrastination. You don't put things off because they're boring. You put them off because they poke at the edges of who you think you are. That's why the essay stayed unwritten, the application sat in drafts, the creative project remained unopened on your desktop. Boredom is a convenient excuse. Fear is the actual culprit. Because if you start and fall short, you come face to face with the possibility that you're not as capable, talented, or sharp as you wanted to believe. Procrastination shields you from that confrontation. It dresses itself in scrolling, video games, or an easy, "I'll get to it later." But underneath, it's fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being judged, fear of losing the picture you've built of yourself. Picture Maya. She was a student with her sights on a prestigious internship. The deadline sat on her calendar for weeks. Every day she refined her CV again, searched for another possible reference, or told herself she needed just one more project in her portfolio. "I'm not quite ready yet," she told herself as the application window shrank to nothing. She never submitted. From the outside, her behavior looked like simple procrastination. But inside, it was a strategy. If she sent it in and failed, that failure would reinforce her deepest fear, that she wasn't enough. Avoidance kept the possibility alive that she could have succeeded if only she tried. Procrastination was her armor against evidence she didn't want to face. This is the way perfectionism quietly takes hold. You don't want a rough first draft, you want one that's already polished. You don't want a small attempt, you want to impress immediately. Whether it's writing, creating, pitching, or learning something new, the thought of falling short feels unbearable. So you prepare, tweak, and wait. Waiting then stretches into weeks or years. The trouble isn't just that perfectionism asks for high standards. It convinces you not to start at all if those standards can't be met up front. Since the conditions for perfect never arrive, you remain in endless hesitation. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks like distraction, excuse, or delay. But behind the disguise, it's fear steering the wheel. There's strong evidence for this pattern. Research links perfectionistic concerns, especially the fear of failure or shame, directly to avoidance behaviors like procrastination. Psychologists describe it this way: people procrastinate not because they're careless, but because they care deeply about protecting their sense of competence. Avoidance feels safer than evidence of shortfall. That's also why procrastination is comforting. As long as you're delaying, you never expose yourself to failure. Your brain holds onto the fantasy version of yourself who could succeed brilliantly someday. If you never audition, you'll never be rejected. If you never submit, you'll never be criticized. Every unfinished draft preserves the idea that you could still shine if only you chose to release it. Hope stays intact because the outcome stays hypothetical. It's a fragile kind of hope, but it keeps the self-image untarnished. And that safety outweighs the abstract reward of progress, at least in the moment. So delay becomes a shield, thin but effective. This isn't just personal. It shows up across teams and organizations too. Workplaces that rely on constant visibility through metrics, online dashboards, or weekly check-ins create added layers of pressure. Younger workers especially describe struggling with fear of being judged early in their careers when every output feels like a test of competence. Some workplace studies suggest these pressures make employees more likely to stall, not because they lack drive, but because they dread negative evaluation. On the surface, it reads like disengagement, but underneath, it's a defensive move against being judged unready. You hear it every day in softer forms. I'm waiting for the right moment. People say they'll create when they have the proper tools, launch the business when life calms down, or apply for jobs once they improve their resume. It feels rational, but the perfect moment is a mirage. It invites you to wait and wait and wait. Life doesn't deliver flawless windows without risk. In reality, the waiting is just fear rebranded as strategy. Years can disappear under the myth of not yet. Here's the truth at the center. Fear stalls you because action produces evidence. Evidence can confirm strengths, but it can also expose shortcomings. Instead of facing that clarity, many cling to the vague power of potential. In potential, you're limitless. In action, you're human. Fear convinces you to choose the former, but it's a false bargain because the fear does not vanish with time. No matter how long you wait, the first draft will never appear flawless, and the first attempt will always feel imperfect. The only way through the fear is action alongside it. The first step is naming the real cause. Instead of telling yourself, I'm lazy, you reframe it as, I'm avoiding starting because I don't want to feel inadequate. Labeling it strips the disguise. What once looked like casual distractions, YouTube binges, chores, endless side tasks, suddenly show up as avoidance patterns. Seeing them clearly makes them harder to excuse. Naming fear forces it into the open, where you can engage with it deliberately instead of wandering inside its fog. Psychologists suggest facing fear in pieces. One method is graded exposure. Don't tackle the hardest version first. Take the smallest step that edges into discomfort. Write one awkward sentence, send one draft email, record 30 seconds of video. Positive psychology research also recommends reframing failure as learning. Treating mistakes as feedback instead of verdicts removes some of the sting. And practicing self-compassion, reminding yourself that imperfection isn't evidence of incompetence, but part of growth, helps you stay active without collapsing under shame. A simple way to combine these is, give yourself one tiny exposure today. Test what happens when you face the feared task directly but briefly. In most cases, the world doesn't collapse and the fear loses its grip. That's where imperfect action comes in. It's a deliberate choice to move while afraid, to submit when it isn't flawless, to ship work that could be cleaner. Not because you lower your standards, but because reality requires a start. A messy draft holds more value than an ideal outline that lives in your head. A half-minute video teaches you more than endless research about editing techniques. A single application attempt, even if rejected, gives you feedback that no imagined version ever will. Imperfect action punches holes through the illusion that waiting leads to safety. The resistance will always push back at the start. Your brain favors certainty, and the beginning of anything feels uncertain. But once you live through a rough start and realize you survived, the balance tilts. Each time you act, you train yourself to see that failure isn't final. Criticism isn't a sentence. Beginning again and again teaches confidence backward. not earned before the act, but after it. Fear tries to reverse that logic, which is why so many people never cross the start line. But once you do, you internalize the truth that movement itself weakens the fear. Think back to Maya. Had she written one draft in an afternoon and pressed submit, maybe her application wouldn't have been perfect, but it would have been real. Maybe she'd have faced a rejection, but she'd also have gathered data on how to improve or even succeeded. By staying safe, she held on to nothing except regret. This is the actual trade-off. Imperfection plus motion gives you a future self with lessons, chances, and progress. Procrastination promises potential, but delivers nothing. That's why the next time you feel yourself stall, don't stop at the surface excuse. Ask what you're protecting by not acting. You might hear the quiet voice, wait until tomorrow, do one more round of prep, make it safer first. That whisper is fear disguising itself as caution. Recognize it, label it, then test it by moving anyway, even in the smallest way possible. Safe is an illusion. Growth only comes from tolerating risk in controlled doses. And the only way forward is making progress visible through action. With that recognition, the task ahead becomes not just psychological but practical. Once you accept that fear hides under procrastination, the challenge is to make starting so light, so minimal, that resistance has no chance to grow heavy. Because the real shift doesn't happen in theories about fear. It happens in the very first step you decide to take. The simple physics of starting. What often feels impossible isn't the whole project, it's taking the first step into it. This is where the simple physics of starting comes in. Think of it like moving a heavy object. The hardest moment isn't when it's already sliding forward, but when you're stuck trying to overcome the weight at rest. Tasks work the same way. The beginning carries the heaviest resistance, even when the work itself is manageable. That invisible drag is what keeps people stuck at the threshold. In physics, this is called activation energy. Fire won't light until the match sparks. Water won't boil until enough heat builds. With procrastination, the spark is the smallest action that changes you from standing still to moving. Before that first spark, everything feels unbearable. After it, momentum takes over, and suddenly the work no longer feels impossible. Psychologists say our brains exaggerate this barrier because of inertia. If you're resting, your body wants to stay at rest. If you're scrolling, it nudges you to keep scrolling. If you're avoiding, avoidance becomes the easiest default. The lie is that you need motivation before beginning. In reality, research shows motivation often follows motion, not precedes it. That's why delay feels so heavy. You're waiting for energy to appear when the act of starting is what makes energy arrive. Take the story of someone struggling to exercise. Every time they pictured a full 1-hour gym session, their mind froze. It wasn't the lifting that crushed them, it was imagining the whole thing at once. Then they set a tiny target, put on shoes, walk into the gym, move for 5 minutes. That was it. No pressure for an hour, no pressure for results. And starting that 5-minute window erased the barrier. 5 minutes became 10, 10 slid into 30. The breakthrough was never about endurance. It was about shrinking the weight of beginning until it was laughably small. That's why micro-commitments work so powerfully. The 2-minute rule or 5-minute rule, both backed by practice guides and behavioral research, show how cutting initiation down to something tiny disrupts procrastination. When you tell yourself, just 2 minutes of writing, the resistance has little to argue with. But once you cross the start line, the brain recalibrates. Resistance drops almost immediately. That first step is the real victory. Everything after it feels lighter. Here's why this matters. When you avoid a task, your mind projects the entire mountain at once. It shows you the thesis, the presentation, the workout, all in one crushing image. But the moment you begin, perception narrows. You see just one sentence to write, one slide to adjust, one stretch to complete. What looked overwhelming shrinks when you engage. That mental shift is the hidden benefit of starting. It turns a wall into stepping stones. To put this into practice, start embarrassingly small. Open the document and type one word. Pick up the guitar and strum for 2 minutes. Pull a textbook closer and read a single heading. These micro starts seem trivial, but they perform the critical function. They move you from stillness into motion. Once in motion, your brain resists stopping more than it resisted starting. That reversal is where progress accelerates. In fact, let's test it right now. Pause this video, set a 2-minute timer, and take one micro step on something you've been postponing. Write a line, clear one file, sketch one idea, Then come back. That tiny burst will prove to you that the doorway is lighter than it looks. You'll feel different, not because the whole task is finished, but because you stepped over inertia and tasted momentum. This is the trick high achievers use, whether they spell it out or not. A novelist doesn't promise themselves a perfect chapter, they promise to open the laptop and place their fingers on the keys. Musicians don't commit to full songs daily, they commit to touching the strings. Athletes don't demand a full training routine when it feels impossible, they start by tying their shoes. These triggers are rituals built to sidestep resistance. They anchor the brain in beginnings so that momentum handles the rest. These are not advanced tactics. You don't need elite discipline to start for 2 minutes or to make a 5-minute promise. Anyone can open a file, set a timer, or pick up a pen. But once you do, you'll notice how often 2 minutes expand into 20, how often 5 bleed into 50. Because after the start, your brain stops fighting and starts helping. The energy that was once consumed in resisting is redirected into continuing. It's not willpower, it's physics. Think of your own projects that weigh on you. The paper you haven't touched in weeks, the habit you've been meaning to build, the task you keep scanning in your planner but never open. Each is heavier in thought than in reality. Every day you stare at them, the weight grows. Every day you delay, the pressure builds. But the moment you shrink the goal to just 2 minutes, the wall collapses. Hours might pass once you begin, not because you pushed yourself harder, but simply because starting broke the spell. That shift has a deeper payoff. Once you enter motion, progress starts rewarding you. The present self tends to crave easy dopamine, scrolling, streaming, effortless relief. But progress releases dopamine too. Completing one small piece, even just typing a sentence, sends a feedback loop to your brain. This feels good, let's do more. The potential self grows stronger with each reinforcement. It's no longer you wrestling resistance, it's progress creating momentum. Researchers often call this activation energy the hardest psychological hurdle, but they also agree the hurdle is thinner than it looks. You don't need discipline for hours. You need permission for 2 minutes. You don't need motivation as a prerequisite. You need motion as the trigger. Every time you remember that, you take power away from procrastination. Starting small isn't a trick, it's a physics law applied to behavior. And here's the final piece. Momentum without direction can still fool you. Once you start moving, it's easy to channel energy into tasks that feel busy but don't matter. Emails answered, notifications cleared, dashboards tweaked, all of them create motion but not progress. This is the next trap. People confuse any movement with achievement, forgetting that results measure success, not appearances. So while starting small will always help you overcome resistance, the next question is, where does that momentum go? Because working longer or harder isn't the same as moving towards something meaningful. That's the critical distinction that determines whether momentum lifts you or wastes you. Busy isn't the same as progress. Why do you sometimes collapse after a 10-hour day and still feel like nothing moved forward? You showed up, you answered messages, you nudged a dozen tasks along, but when it's over, you can't point to what actually changed. That unease isn't random burnout. It's a signal that much of your energy went into being busy, not into creating progress. Busyness reassures your present self because it feels like motion. Progress satisfies your potential self because it leaves evidence. The two rarely match, and unless you learn to separate them, you'll keep burning full days on activity that quietly evaporates. Watch how easily this plays out. Take email as an example. Emptying an inbox feels like a victory. You hit 0 unread, scroll through the clean slate, and enjoy a shot of satisfaction. But where's the step that mattered? The proposal draft sits untouched, the code base unchanged, the paper unstarted. Hours sink into small wins that reset your environment without moving your work. This is why busyness is seductive. It lets you feel neat and in control, while the high-value work waits untouched. I once spoke to a founder who fell hard into this trap. His startup consumed his days, but most of his time went into reactive busyness, dominating email replies, dashing through chat threads, putting out little fires. Close to 5 hours a day disappeared this way. At the end of a month, the inbox looked tidy, but growth hadn't moved, features weren't shipping, and investors weren't impressed. On paper, he was working marathon days. In reality, the company was standing still. His hours produced visibility, not progress. That's the danger. Drowning in small, visible tasks while starving the work that creates real value. This pattern isn't limited to individuals. Studies and industry reports show that a large portion of knowledge workers' days fill with meetings, Slack messages, and work about work. Hybrid setups make this even worse. Employees describe meeting overload and constant digital chatter that eats into focus time. The calendar looks full, the dashboard shows activity, but outcomes rarely match the hours recorded. Teams often confuse responsiveness with contribution. The log proves you were online, but not that you finished anything important. That's how the present self tricks you. It whispers, join this meeting, it's structured. Answer that message, it's quick. Move the boxes on your task board, it feels productive. The difficult work, the deep, focused piece that might carry long-term weight gets pushed aside. By week's end, the result is obvious. Plenty of time consumed, almost no substance produced. The present self feels useful because it stayed in motion. The potential self feels betrayed because it sees almost nothing built. So how can you tell the difference? Ask, did today leave something behind or only consume hours? Deleting emails leaves you empty once the messages refill. Tweaking a system looks nice until tomorrow makes it messy again. That's busyness. Writing a page creates output. Shipping a prototype creates evidence. Having one meaningful conversation that secures a decision moves the line. That's progress. The measurement isn't how long you spent, it's whether something concrete exists that didn't exist before. Think about your own patterns. How often do you leave a meeting with nothing to show except the memory that it happened? How often does half a morning vanish into messaging threads full of thanks and got it? That is the evaporation effect, time logged without results. It explains why you can feel crushed after a packed day but have no accomplishments to point to. Your energy went into activity that disappeared the moment you stopped. The risk grows sharper when culture rewards activity over progress. Workplaces often praise packed calendars, quick replies, and high task counts. Colleagues brag about how fast they clear notifications. Those metrics favor busyness, not outcomes. Your current self thrives in that system. It loves feedback that says you're on top of it. But your potential self gets nothing. No growth, no product, no real mark left behind. Productivity theater looks impressive but feeds only appearances. The moment you recognize this gap, you start seeing the thief in the open. Exhaustion no longer reads like accomplishment. It just means you spun your wheels. That realization is freeing. You notice mornings spent on shallow updates, afternoons tilted into inbox management. You begin to measure differently by what remains once the hours are gone. Naming busyness for what it is weakens its grip. It forces you to admit when your day lacked evidence. And once you notice it, you can't unsee it. But naming is only step one. Awareness doesn't protect you if you still give in to endless meetings and reactive tasks. Action requires leverage. Instead of tracking hours worked, pick one output metric you'll hold yourself to. Maybe it's one page written, one client email sent, one working feature produced. Swap one busy metric for one progress metric daily. Research into hybrid work and outcome-based review systems consistently shows that output metrics create better accountability than hours spent. Hours vanish. A finished draft remains. A design mock-up remains. A shipped feature remains. An outcome is concrete. Here's your test. Tomorrow, ask yourself not how long did I work, but what did I build today that proves progress? Pick one piece of evidence. It doesn't need to be huge, just real. A captured idea, a recorded draft, a finished plan. When you start measuring that way, your brain shifts gradually from chasing the glow of activity to seeking the satisfaction of output. It's a different kind of dopamine, less immediate, but more lasting. Over time, this pattern reshapes how you see effort. You stop piling up checkboxes that never matter and begin protecting the hours that do. Not because you magically gain discipline, but because you learn the truth. Busyness doesn't feed your potential self. Only outputs do. And every time you log a small, visible win, your potential self gains ground against the present self's craving for comfort. Of course, there's one more twist. Even when you see the trap, tools and systems can pull you back into it. A calendar that looks efficient but collapses in practice. An app that promises focus but adds friction. A notification system that measures responsiveness but distracts from actual work. Tools are double-edged. They can keep you honest, or they can deepen the illusion of productivity. Which way they cut depends on how you use them. And that's the challenge waiting next. Tools that actually work in 2025. Apps don't make you productive just because they sit on your phone. They don't install discipline. At best, they reduce friction. At worst, they distract you further by creating the illusion of progress. The smarter question for 2025 is, what's the latest productivity app? But which tools actually cut distraction and help me finish more? That choice matters because digital systems often promise clarity while flooding you with notifications louder than your friends. The difference between a tool that clears the path and a tool that clutters it can decide whether those hours stay intact or disappear. Take something simple like focus blockers. Social media feeds in 2025 are designed with algorithms that fight to keep you locked in. Your short-term self rarely wins that standoff unaided. Freedom, a classic in this category, can still do what's needed. Block apps and websites during planned sessions. It isn't fancy. It just removes temptation before it takes over. One professional described how installing it across his devices freed up multiple solid hours a day. What changed wasn't the app magically making him focused. It was the limit breaking his habit of bargaining with himself every 10 minutes. For the first time in months, his afternoons belonged to his work rather than his feed. But stopping distractions is just one layer. The newer space in 2025 belongs to AI-assisted organizers. Unlike older apps that left you with a static checklist, these systems can suggest a sensible order for your tasks. They learn from deadlines, recurring patterns, and even from when you focus best. Done right, they nudge you toward priorities rather than drowning you in micro reminders. But here's where caution matters. If you let them shuffle tasks constantly, add excessive nudges, or require complex setups, you can end up managing the system instead of your work. That's why many research groups, including management analysts, emphasize using these platforms sparingly and ensuring people have proper role-specific training. The lesson is clear. Use AI to highlight the next most important step, not to over-automate your day. Another tool rising in popularity is the digital focus room. Platforms built for timed, silent sessions with strangers. Think Flow Club or newer AI-moderated variants. Let groups commit to 50 minutes of work together. The concept sounds odd until you try it. Accountability, even to anonymous faces on a screen, can stop you from giving in to distraction. Current self feels less comfortable bailing when others are visible, even silently. It isn't glamorous. You're not buying structure or entertainment, just a virtual table where others expect you to stay at your chair. Thousands rely on it not because it's high-tech, but because it enforces a commitment that was otherwise flimsy. Here's the reality. No matter what you choose, tools do not save you without limits. It doesn't matter if it's a blocker, an organizer, or a focus room. If you bypass the blocker every time, spend hours customizing the AI, or log off the work group when restless, the benefit collapses. The strength comes from committing to guardrails that your present self can't negotiate around. Without limits, even the best tools collapse into distractions wrapped in shinier packaging. So what's a stack that actually works in 2025 without drowning you in screens? Think minimal. Stick with only 3 functions: a distraction blocker to cut off the obvious temptations, a prioritizer, AI or manual, to keep you focused on what matters, and an accountability tool like Pomodoro timers or occasional focus sessions that help you stay engaged. That's it. Anything outside those 3 is bonus, and too many extras become weight. The irony is harsh but true. The more apps you add, the more likely you are to spend your output hours managing them instead of using them. Consider the difference between someone running 6 dashboards each morning versus someone running just 1 compact list. The first person juggles notifications, integrations, sync failures, and calendar conflicts. The second glances once and starts. The first collapses into work about work. The second moves forward. This is why simplification is so powerful. The digital environment should fade into the background, freeing your energy to do the hard part, starting and sustaining. Tools succeed only when they stay invisible. Think about how many people fall into overload. They download half a dozen trackers, 2 note apps, 3 schedulers, and a timer promising new discipline. For a short time, they feel energized, convinced they've engineered the solution. By week 3, the setup itself is collapsing. Between settings, integrations, and routine checks, they now spend more energy maintaining systems than working. The illusion of productivity grows more convincing the busier the dashboard appears. But reality catches up fast. Output hasn't changed. This is no different from arranging desk folders instead of opening textbooks. distraction dressed as progress with technology as the mask. Meanwhile, people who limit their stack often see simple but dramatic wins. One knowledge worker in 2025 shared that his core stack boiled down to 3 pieces: freedom blocking his worst temptations, motion quietly ranking his major tasks by weight and deadline, and 2 virtual focus sessions each week to lock him into accountability. That was it. Nothing sophisticated, nothing overloaded. The result? Hours freed daily that once leaked away to bottomless feeds, digital ping-pong, and decision fatigue. Nothing changed about his skills, only the reduced space for his present self to slip out of work. Over a year, the regained time compounded into finished projects that no system overhaul alone could have provided. Even workplace studies reinforce this point. Analysts warn that AI, scheduling tools, and focus platforms become effective only if organizations provide context and training. Dropping technology onto employees without guidance adds friction without benefit. The same is true individually. Piling more software into your routine without clear rules guarantees frustration. What works better is choosing a handful of guardrails you actively practice until they become effortless. 2 or 3 tools, consistently applied, outperform 10 apps rotated inconsistently. It's worth repeating, the best apps are often the plainest. A straightforward distraction blocker, a clear prioritized list, and a basic focus timer protect more progress than a complex 20-feature suite. None of them are glamorous, but that's the point. The current self loves shiny features. The potential self needs calm guardrails. The minimal approach enforces that shift. It pulls you away from spending hours on visual tweaks so that you face the only challenge that matters, doing the work itself. And that's why the most critical decision in 2025 isn't which new app to chase. It's whether you're willing to cut the extras and use a few tools for what they were made to do. Tools are guardrails, not saviors. They keep you from drifting but cannot drag you across the finish. The real transformation begins after you reclaim the time. What you do with that space decides if you're ever closer to your potential. At this point, the question isn't whether tools can help. It's whether other people, with similar distractions and struggles, have already proven these strategies to work. Because sometimes the strongest spark doesn't come from theory or features, but from seeing how ordinary people applied small, simple systems to win the same fight you're in. How others beat the same battle. You're not the only one who struggles with wasted hours or loses energy to distractions. The challenge you face repeats everywhere, at home, in offices, across classrooms. People stall for the same reasons: interruptions, endless digital noise, and the habit of reacting instead of creating. The difference between those who stay stuck and those who turn the corner isn't about intelligence or hidden talent. It comes down to small, practical systems that give the potential self room to operate. The proof isn't abstract. Stories from workplaces, classrooms, and online communities show that ordinary people in ordinary settings regained control with repeatable strategies. One common pattern appears in remote work. Many employees report that entire days vanish into chats, email threads, and quick, just 5-minute meetings. Big projects stall, not because of lack of effort, but because focus never arrives. In various community reports, people described how using a simple Pomodoro-style approach, setting a 25-minute timer, blocking distractions, and ignoring messages until the bell rang, changed their output. 25 minutes sounds trivial, but those intervals stacked into deep work sessions. In one discussion thread, workers said that one guarded hour each morning, sometimes only 2 to 3 Pomodoros chained together, recovered more progress than whole afternoons of unfocused multitasking. What mattered wasn't discipline on its own. It was the external structure that made resistance manageable. Another frequent example comes from professionals who once treated long schedules as proof of commitment. Many built reputations on being always available, but eventually realized the cost. Lots of presence, but not much real progress. Controlled studies and workplace case reports confirm this problem. When performance is measured by attendance or hours spent, results plateau. The shift happens when people define daily outcomes in measurable actions. In surveys and coaching case write-ups, consultants, managers, and even students said that tracking one key action each day, closing a contract, finishing a draft, resolving a major issue, accelerated progress faster than 12-hour routines. The adjustment was simple: Measure by outcomes instead of time. Over months, this daily reset built visible proof of growth, while schedules became lighter and results sharper. Research reinforces why these changes work. Controlled experiments and organizational pilots consistently show that structured focus intervals and outcome-based prioritization reduce wasted time and improve results. In hybrid and remote setups, where meeting overload and constant messaging erode attention, even one protected block of focus changes output patterns. Across industries, from software teams to consulting firms to student study groups, the same evidence repeats. You don't need complex systems, you need boundaries that tilt the day toward progress. It's easy, though, to dismiss these stories as belonging to other people in different circumstances. That belief is one of procrastination's strongest defenders, yet examples cut across contexts. Online communities are filled with shared wins from students who stopped cramming late and instead scheduled short, timed reviews. Office surveys highlight employees who swapped reactive inbox maintenance for one block of needle-moving tasks each morning. Independent research charts the same gains in diverse roles. The pattern is consistent. Change doesn't come from perfect routines or massive overhauls. It comes from a repeatable rhythm, blocking small sessions of concentration and tying progress to specific actions. These stories also show the ripple effects. Restructured schedules aren't just about output. People reported feeling lighter because the day left evidence instead of exhaustion. Managers noticed because projects advanced instead of remaining in planning. Confidence rose because progress was visible, not hypothetical. The current self thrives on busy work and appearance. The potential self thrives on completed deliverables. Timers, action lists, and accountability systems shift power toward the potential self incrementally, day after day. And the real strength is in how modest the systems are. Nobody built their breakthroughs on glamorous reinventions. They didn't suddenly transform into morning warriors or work 80 hours a week. A 25-minute focus sprint, a list with one prioritized task, an accountability check at the end of the day. Those were the levers. Applied consistently, they updated identity as much as output. A worker who once said, "I can't focus," began saying, "I finish my priorities." A professional who once equated time with worth started equating outcomes with confidence. These aren't dramatic plot twists, they're quiet shifts repeated steadily enough to create lasting change. That's also what strips away the myth that discipline belongs only to a select few. The people who applied these strategies weren't transformed by hidden motivation. They built scaffolds that supported them against distraction and hesitation. Community reports and case studies show this clearly. External systems take priority over raw willpower. Because when the system is active, the current self has less room to negotiate. And when the pressure of choice is reduced, the potential self finally gains leverage. Instead of seeing these examples as distant inspiration, test them as living proof. They confirm that progress is concrete, minutes of blocked concentration, actions that move outcomes, tasks that generate evidence. And they frame procrastination not as a personal flaw, but as a gap between a vague plan and a working system. Once the system is in place, identity adapts around it. People who thought they lacked focus discovered they could sustain work repeatedly. Professionals who saw themselves as stuck discovered accelerated growth in careers. Students who thought they lacked discipline built academic routines in weeks. Here's the challenge for you right now. Set one 25-minute timer today for a task you've delayed. Turn off notifications, silence the noise, and give your potential self a complete window with no interruptions. Not tomorrow, not after better conditions appear. Today, this single action flips theory into evidence. You'll feel the resistance shrink as soon as the timer begins, and by the end, the task will already look smaller. That experience is how you train the shift. These are not sweeping transformations. They're the kind of basic structures available to anyone. That's what gives them power. Systems strip procrastination back to its mechanics, and once you start applying them, you'll see that your case isn't unique. Distraction and delay look universal, but so do the tools that fight them. From there, the only question is whether you'll set up your own stack of small wins. Others already have. The evidence is clear. Your potential self grows stronger every time you implement a guardrail, and weaker every time you delay. Seeing proof through these examples is step one. Step 2 is testing strategies directly in your life. And that's where we turn next. Not sweeping reform, but a set of immediate, practical moves you can start applying before the day is over. 5 immediate steps to win today. Breaking procrastination doesn't come from ambitious plans that collapse after 2 days. You don't need to rebuild your whole life or engineer a flawless system. What you need are 5 small steps you can actually do today, simple levers that shift the fight in your potential self's favor. These aren't complex, and they aren't glamorous, but they're research-backed, repeatable, and designed to cut straight through hesitation. Consider them your short list of immediate wins. Step 1 is the 2-minute start. This isn't about finishing a task in one sitting, it's about dismantling the wall that keeps you from beginning. A 2-minute start, a common micro-commitment technique supported by behavioral research, means you lower the bar so far down that resistance has no excuse left. Write a few words, wash one dish, open one document and type a heading. That's all. Once the activation energy is spent, momentum usually carries you further. And even if it doesn't, you still bank a win, you showed up. Showing up rewires identity. Instead of ending the day with "I didn't start," you end it with "I began." That shift matters because the brain stops associating tasks with dread and starts associating them with initiation. Starting small isn't weakness, it's the wedge that pries the door open so progress can walk through. Step 2 is claiming one guarded hour. Not 8, not your whole day, just 60 minutes fully protected. Research on focus and Pomodoro-style sessions makes it clear. Unbroken attention multiplies output, and one dedicated hour often produces more than an entire scattered day. The practice is simple. Pick your biggest digital distraction, TikTok, inboxes, chat threads, and put it behind a wall. Use a blocker, silence notifications, or move the device completely out of reach. In that hour, no negotiation counts and no exceptions slip in. What happens inside that block feels entirely different. You notice how much the brain can achieve without interruptions, and the contrast will surprise you. The current self doesn't get to wander. The potential self finally has clean ground to work on. And when it ends, you can return to normal life knowing at least one solid stretch produced visible progress. That single reclaimed hour grows like compound interest, day by day. Step 3 is selecting your needle mover. At the start of each day, ask one question. What single task, if completed, would make today worthwhile even if nothing else moved? Write it down and put it somewhere you'll see. Research on outcome-first planning, summarized in workplace studies and productivity frameworks, shows that aligning your focus to one meaningful result each day significantly improves follow-through. This doesn't mean the rest of your to-do list vanishes. It means priorities finally have a hierarchy. Messages, formatting, and small chores may feel urgent, but they rarely move the needle. One call, one section drafted, one prototype finished, these define progress. A quick accountability trick strengthens it. Tell one person your needle mover. Peer accountability, supported in hybrid workplace research, sharpens consistency because someone else knows what you promised to complete. The potential self thrives when progress is clear, specific, and shared. Step 4 is replacing hours with wins. Most people measure success by time spent, how long they sat at the desk, how many hours they logged. But hours are a shallow metric. Research into outcome-based systems shows that actual deliverables matter far more than time recorded. So instead of tracking hours, list your concrete wins for the day. A finished page, a call made, a draft submitted. Small wins count because they build evidence. Each line you jot down becomes proof you're capable of completion. The current self still gets its dopamine hit from checking something off, but the potential self benefits too because the progress is real, not busy work. Over weeks, these lists compound into a visible record of momentum. When doubt shows up, you won't need motivation, you'll have evidence. Step 5 is choosing one imperfect action daily. Perfectionism convinces you to wait until the resume looks polished, the video looks flawless, the conditions look ideal. Research linking perfectionistic concerns to procrastination shows how this mindset locks people in endless delay. The antidote is to push one imperfect action out into the world each day. Submit the draft even if it feels clumsy. Press publish on the project before it feels shiny. Attempt the workout even if you can't finish the whole set. This rewires your nervous system to accept that progress comes through rough starts, not perfect conditions. Growth mindset studies confirm that framing mistakes as iterations transforms how you engage with fear of failure. By practicing imperfection deliberately, You stop your current self from hiding behind endless prep and give your potential self something new to build on. Each imperfect effort weakens the hold of fear and makes completed actions your new default. Each of these 5 steps looks small: 2 minutes, 1 hour, 1 action, 1 list, 1 imperfect attempt. But their strength lies in how little room they leave for resistance. They're too modest for convincing excuses, yet powerful enough to realign your day. Together, they cover the whole battle, starting despite resistance, protecting focus from distraction, targeting what matters, measuring results not hours, and breaking the perfectionism trap. Why do they work? Because they shift the fight from abstract theory into visible behavior. The brain finds comfort in planning, in reorganizing, in waiting for perfect moments. But results come from frictionless starting points and defended boundaries. These 5 levers cut directly through the stories your present self uses to stall. Each one is practical, fast, and backed both by research and by the lived experiences of people who broke the cycle before you. They strip away excuses until action is the only option left. Notice how balanced they are. The 2-minute rule drives you to start. The guarded hour protects sustained focus. The needle mover pulls you toward high-value work. Wins lists record evidence that builds identity. Imperfect action disarms fear. None requires extreme discipline or long-term transformation to begin. They are immediate. If stacked together day after day, they compound into something far larger than their individual parts. Systems succeed by repetition, not grandeur. You rewrite your story, not in one sweeping motion, but in tiny, consistent pivots. Here's how it looks today. Right now, choose one task and apply the 2-minute rule. Put your phone out of reach and give yourself a 60-minute block of quiet. Decide one needle mover, share it with someone, and ignore the noise until that task is handled. Write down one win before the day ends so progress feels visible. And when perfection tempts you into stalling, cut through it with one small, imperfect act. In less than a day, you'll have tested every lever in this playbook. Do this not as a promise to yourself in the future, but as an experiment you run now. Every action offers proof that procrastination isn't some immovable character flaw. It's just friction reduced by practice. And each repetition transfers power from the comfort-seeking self to the version of you ready to build. You don't overcome procrastination by waiting for motivation. You overcome it by stacking these small, evidence-backed moves into rhythm. And when you do, you start noticing something subtle. The version of you that always dreamed, prepared, or worried less has less power. The one that takes action, however small, starts to lead. That's the shift these steps invite, and it leaves you with a choice. You could walk away and let the current self negotiate another delay. Or you could pull one lever right now and give your potential self the chance to take the wheel. The answer lies not in more planning or hesitation. It lies in action, the kind that starts small but changes the direction entirely. The version of you that matters isn't the one who waits for the right feeling. It's the one who takes a step, even if that step is small, rough, or uncertain. Planning looks responsible, and long lists look safe, but neither changes your direction until you begin. So try it now. Pick one thing and give it 2 minutes. Write a line, open the file, or make the call. This isn't about instant transformation, it's about tilting today toward progress. Your potential self wins when you move first, not when you prepare forever.